horrifying stories of sleep paralysis. This transpired on an evening that was not unlike any other. At the time, I was a child who had just begun secondary school. My parents had placed me to bed and subsequently retired to their bedroom on the opposite side of the house. I was required to memorize the words for a presentation that was due tomorrow, despite the fact that I was supposed to be resting. Naturally, as a child, I was not entirely prepared. I prioritized my academic performance, as did my parents. However, I encountered difficulties with procrastination. I sat in my bed, reading the script repeatedly in an effort to, as quickly as possible, memorize it. However, it became late, and I was aware that I needed to retire for the night. My coursework was pushed off the bed, and I hid beneath the blankets, closing my eyes. I was at ease during the initial portion of the presentation. However, I was apprehensive about losing my understanding of the final section overnight. As I lay there, I began to mentally recite the concluding paragraphs of my presentation. I was unable to keep track of time, as I had not opened my eyes for what appeared to be 25 or 40 minutes. As I was reciting in my mind, I eventually felt comfortable going to bed, as I was now more self-assured. Before I was jolted by a soft sound from the closet directly in front of my bed, I continued to lie in the same position for a few more minutes. I rapidly opened my eyes and gazed directly down the edge of the bed. Despite the complete obscurity of the room, I could discern a figure standing by my closet. I was unable to discern its characteristics. However, it was tall and remained stationary. Upon observing this, my pulse began to beat rapidly, and I endeavored to scream as loudly as possible. However, my lips would not move. I endeavored to rise and proceed to run, but my body could not move. I felt as though I was trapped within a carapace, attempting to extricate myself, but nothing was working. The more I endeavored to exert myself internally, the more it felt as though a substantial burden was pressing down on my chest, causing me to struggle to breathe. I was unable to speak, so the only thing I could do was gaze at the figure in front of me. I was utterly appalled, as I had never encountered anything of the sort before. I entertained the possibility that I was experiencing a hallucination. However, it was all too real. I was aware that I was not asleep. Then, I began to contemplate whether I would remain in this state indefinitely if I were incapacitated. However, the imminent danger of the figure in front of me supplanted these thoughts. The figure began to move slowly, strolling to the end of my bed after a minute of terrifying anxiety. I could hear my pulse beating rapidly and my blood pumping through me intensely as it approached. I exerted extraordinary effort to move, shriek, and flee, but I was rendered immobile. I continued to be unable to see its face as it approached the bed. I could discern its presence, but it appeared as though a dark shadow was enveloping it, obscuring all of its characteristics. I desired to weep, awaken, or do anything else to conclude this miserable evening. However, after remaining stationary for an additional few seconds, it placed its long limbs on the bed and began to crawl toward me. It gradually traversed my body, with a shadow obscuring its face, before ultimately halting directly above my head. The figure rapidly leaned its face directly in front of mine, screaming with its mouth wide open and staring into my eyes, following a long second of total silence. My eyes were wide open, and fear was surging through me. Then, in an instant, it was gone without a trace. As I lay there, stunned and terrified, the screams, the figure, and everything else fell silent and vanished. My fingers trembled. Subsequently, I was able to resume my movements as if they had never occurred. I leaned forward and feverishly gazed around, still uncertain about the experience I had just undergone. I began to question the existence of demons as a child, and that is precisely what I witnessed. I was uncertain as to whether the experience I had just had was genuine, or if it was merely a hallucination. Due to the fact that it occurred in the late 1980s, I was unable to research the matter and determine its nature. Additionally, I was apprehensive about disclosing the information to anyone, fearing that they might refer me to a mental institution. Therefore, for 15 years, I was unaware of the events that transpired that evening. It was not until I was driving home from work one day and had the radio on that I ultimately discovered the truth. The presenter was discussing an experience he had on a podcast-style program, and his account was alarmingly similar to mine. As I arrived at my residence, the radio program was still in progress, and I remained in my vehicle, listening attentively. His account of the terrifying encounter persisted until the very conclusion, when an individual inquired as to his assessment of the events. He finally provided the answer I had been seeking for years after a brief delay, stating that it was a dreadful and terrifying condition known as sleep paralysis. Story 2. I have been afflicted with slumber paralysis for as long as I can recall. I assumed that it was commonplace and innocuous due to its frequency, and my parents concurred. I never experienced any kinds of hallucinations. I would abruptly awaken in the midst of the night and be able to only open my eyes and observe my surroundings. It would always be slightly eerie, as I would want to draw the sheets over my head to conceal myself, but was unable to do so. However, there was a singular experience that I had that left me feeling extremely uneasy, and I continue to reflect on it to this day. It was a school night, and I was 12 years old at the time. My parents required me to prepare for bed and turned off all the lights at 8:40 p.m. after a pleasant weekend. Just like any other night, I fell asleep as soon as I became comfortable, cradling my plush doll between my arms. I was never aware of the reason why my brain would rouse me at night, leaving me conscious and paralyzed. However, the most common explanation appeared to be a complete lack of explanation. Nevertheless, upon awakening this evening, I experienced a distinct sensation. I was more concerned than I typically am. I heard movement from downstairs in just a few seconds after opening my eyes. I was unable to determine the time, but I was aware that my father would occasionally remain up late. Consequently, I made an effort to remain composed. However, the movement became more discernible, exhibiting soft footsteps ascending the stairs at a leisurely pace. I was aware of the distinction between the sound of someone casually walking up the stairs and the sound of someone walking up quietly and attentively even as a child. I continued to suppress my thoughts, but I began to agonize more in my mind. As the footsteps approached my bedroom door and ceased, my parents reminded me that hallucinations are a frequent consequence of sleep paralysis. Despite my lack of experience with them, I was certain that I would eventually encounter them. They likened it to a nightmare that appears to be real. However, I must continue to remind myself that it is not real and will shortly pass, just like any other dream. I closed my eyes and recited in my mind that this was merely a dream and that nothing was real while lying there immobile. I regained consciousness after a minute and experienced a sense of relief, as I was certain that the hallucination had concluded. That was until my bedroom door gradually cracked open. I was almost holding my breath in dread as I observed what appeared to be a man slowly enter my room. I again closed my eyes in an attempt to put an end to this dreadful hallucination, as the soft footfall on the wooden floors approached the side of my bed. I listened attentively. I was too frightened to even open my eyes, and I continued to repeat in my mind that this was merely a dream and that I needed to wake up. My mannequin was removed from my side, and I could feel the man's breath on my shoulder. Then, the footfall dissipated as they progressed toward the room's conclusion. I slowly opened my eyes, still in a state of horror, and caught a glimpse of the man discreetly closing the door as he walked away with my doll. Despite this, I continued to be unable to move. I simply closed my eyes once more and endeavored to regulate my emotions. However, it proved to be a challenging task. My mind was inundated with every repulsive notion that I could generate simultaneously. I cannot even recall resuming my slumber. However, upon awakening in the morning, I felt considerably more tranquil. I sat up and examined the surroundings to ensure that this was not another peculiar dream. Until I examined my side, everything appeared to be in order. The puppet was absent. I found myself overcome with emotions once more, and I burst into tears as I fled to my parents' bedroom and roused them from their slumber. Upon my explanation, they appeared unsurprised, as they had anticipated an event of this nature. However, my father arose and entered my room to assist me in my search for my doll. He believed that I had simply misplaced it, and that it would be recovered promptly, as it typically is. However, somewhat unexpectedly, it did not. My dad, who was still unconcerned, proceeded to explore the remainder of the house. He was aware of the doll's significance to me, and likely intended to alleviate my distress regarding my nightmare. However, we were unable to locate it. In reality, we never did. Story 3. Until a few months ago, I had never encountered sleep paralysis. I had consistently experienced a sense of serendipity when I listened to the anecdotes of others regarding it. It was appalling, but it appears that my fortunes were not on my side. I believe it was due to my extreme tension or anxiety, as I had only experienced it a few times after that, and it subsequently subsided. However, the initial experience was the most detrimental. I had fallen unconscious relatively quickly. However, I have a proclivity for awakening at approximately the same hour each evening to use the restroom. Tonight was no exception, except that I was so fatigued that I elected to delay my awakening and return to bed. When I realized that I was unable to move, I was attempting to fall back slumber. This was an unprecedented occurrence, which caused my pulse to race. Subsequently, I heard the door creak open. I was unable to see anything because I was lying on my side with the blanket primarily covering my face. Suddenly I heard voices, and I remember feeling so horrified and apprehensive. 2 male voices conversed on the opposite side of my bed. I attempted to summon assistance from my companions by shouting, but I was unsuccessful. I was unable to communicate in any way. This exacerbated my anxiety and caused my pulse to beat more rapidly. I experienced an inability to exhale. These individuals who were present in my room began to advance to my side of the bed. I could hear them conversing with one another, but I was unable to comprehend their words. I maintained my eyes closed in the expectation that they would assume I was unconscious and proceed to retrieve the item they were seeking before departing. I was solely preoccupied with the notion that they were criminals. I even pondered why my dog did not bark or how I did not hear anything downstairs, as it all felt so real. After all, I am a light sleeper. I attempted to maintain my composure by closing my eyes. However, one of them was so near that I could hear him breathing directly next to me. He then murmured something to me, as if he were conversing with me. I heard them depart, and moments later, the door slammed shut. I was still unable to move, so I remained in the same position until I fell unconscious. That night, I had an even stranger dream. I awoke to determine whether my money had been stolen after they had departed. It had been. In my dream, I awoke my roommate and disclosed the entire situation to him. Subsequently, I examined the video cameras and observed 2 individuals enter my room and approach me. Subsequently, we proceeded downstairs to ask our other companions if they had observed anything. However, they were already on the phone with the police when we arrived, as our living room television was missing and the area was disorganized. I have never experienced a dream as vivid as this one, and the fact that it resumed at the exact point where my sleep paralysis had ended was even more peculiar. I, of course, verified that everything was still present the following morning when I awoke, and it was. I was certain that I was conscious, despite the fact that the video cameras did not capture anything. It felt so real. It was the most peculiar experience of my life. I experienced a few instances in which I was unable to breathe or move following that evening. The door of a different room would either open or close, and I would hear it. Due to my habit of sleeping on my side, I have never encountered any figures, unlike many others. In that regard, I am fortunate. However, auditory hallucinations during the night are nearly as dreadful, as it is impossible to observe the scene. You are merely required to listen and maintain the expectation that the entity in question does not exist. Alternatively, you may not be as fortunate as I was. Coming soon to the channel will be incredible stories that will surprise you. Be sure to subscribe to the channel